Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to Cozy Horror. Looks like we've made it through another week, and to take you into the weekend, I've got you 5 great stories so that you can ease out of the work week. Today's topic of discussion is strange gardens, and I think we all have some strange gardens here and now. Let's start us off right with a trip to Grandpa's garden, though not quite that Grandpa. It's a story about a boy who's trying to live up to his grandfather's legacy. However, what Grandpa needs is a little bit beyond his ability. So let's take that trip to Grandpa's garden. I came home from work to find my wife vacuuming in my son's room. Again? I asked, already guessing the answer. She sighed. It's the second time this week, Dave. I need this to stop. I shook my head, laughing a little. I'll talk to him, I promised, and went to find my son. It isn't that strange for kids to collect things. Some of them collect bugs or baseball cards or interesting rocks, but my son's interest was getting pretty weird. I could have understood finding Pokemon cards or even a box of old animal bones, but what he was collecting was dirt. It had started on Wednesday when his mother had been changing his sheets. She had noticed some dust on them, but that's pretty common for a 6-year-old. He wasn't a huge fan of baths, and sometimes he slept in the same clothes he had went to preschool in. It wasn't until she picked up the pillow so she could remove the case that she found the fistful of dirt that was hidden under it. It was quite a bit of dirt, or so she said. She claimed it was about 6 or 7 big handfuls, and she wondered how long he had been putting it in there. She cleaned it up and asked him not to put dirt under his pillow again. It seemed he hadn't listened. I walked into the kitchen to find David coloring a picture at the table. I could see that he'd been digging in the dirt again, even from here. It seemed he'd been digging in the backyard a lot lately. David liked to garden, which was weird for a boy his age, but we tried to encourage him to be curious. His grandpa, my dad, had been teaching him how to garden before he passed, and I thought that he might have been continuing the garden his grandpa was tending, as a way to remember him. I looked over at the back door as I approached the table, and I could see the flowers coming in. I guessed that David, like his grandpa, had a green thumb. "What you drawing, buddy?" I looked over his shoulder and saw that he was drawing flowers that circled a big tree, the very garden that I'd been looking at. "The garden," he answered, in his innocent little voice. I nodded, rolling a purple crayon under my finger. "You been playing in the garden today?" "Mm-hmm," he said, his tongue sticking out as he colored. I nodded again, clearly beating around the bush as I tried to get to the point. "Mom says she keeps finding dirt under your pillow. Is there a reason you keep hiding dirt under there?" "'Cause he tells me to," David said. "Who tells you to, buddy?" He opened his mouth, but he seemed to think better of it. "No one," he said, too quickly. That made me feel a little uneasy. "You can tell me, buddy. Is someone making you put dirt under there?" "No," he said, and when he kept ignoring me to color his picture, I started to lose interest. "Okay, well, no more dirt under your pillow. Okay, buddy?" "Yes, Daddy," he said, and I left him to his coloring, thinking the situation had been handled. I was heading to the shower later, his bedtime already passed, when I heard something that made me wonder. No, they say I can't do it anymore." "I don't know. I don't want to stop talking to you, but I have to follow the rules." He was quiet. He seemed to be listening to something. I know you want out. I'm trying my best, but it's hard to dig." I peeked around the corner and saw him lying in bed. He was talking to his pillow. His words muffled sometimes as he spoke to whoever it was that he was talking to. If someone was talking to him, it was too low for me to hear, and when he rolled away from the door, I wondered if he was talking to the dirt that was probably under his pillow. I started watching him a little closer after that, especially when he was in the garden. He watered and weeded daily, but sometimes it seemed like he was just digging, like all kids did. But this digging wasn't as haphazard as it could have been. He was digging in a particular place, what would have been the south side of the tree. I didn't really like him playing there. It stirred up a lot of memories, but it would have seemed odd for me to tell him to stop. He was digging in the exact place where his grandfather had laid as he breathed his last. I took some comfort that he had died in his garden, a place he loved more than most people, it seemed. I'd seen him working in the garden all the time when I was a kid, but my interactions hadn't been as nice as the one I'd had with my son. No one was allowed to touch his plants but him. And I got taken to task more times than I care to remember over things that happened in the garden. An errant football or a misthrown baseball was all it would take to get a lick with the belt across my backside. My son seemed to have been immune to this, however. When he was born, he had become the apple of his grandpa's eye. My dad would take him into the garden, teaching him how to till the soil, how to plant, and when to plant. They had loved it out there, but Dad had always made it clear that it was an activity for him and his grandson, and I wasn't invited. "You just mess it up, like you did when you were little," he would say. Now it seemed my son was keeping the garden in his memory, but it was still weird to see him out there digging so furiously. The dirt kept appearing under his pillow. Not just under his pillow either. The dirt was beginning to appear under his bed. His mother was beside herself, and every day when I came home, it seemed like there was more dirt in the house. "You have to talk to him," she said one night, my son once again coloring at the table. "Today, I found it under his bed, under his pillow, and in buckets in his closet. I don't know how it's getting in here, or where he's even getting it all from, but it has to stop." I rubbed my neck as I came into the kitchen. I'd never been as hands-on as my dad had been. I didn't want my son to fear me the way that I had feared his grandpa. I tried not to shout, and I'd never so much as swatted his hand. I wanted him raised differently, but it seemed that now I'd given him a little bit too much leeway. "Hey, I thought we talked about the dirt, kiddo." David nodded, not looking up from his coloring. "Yeah, I know." He was coloring another picture of the garden, the flowers in bloom, and now there was something different there, too. In the middle of the garden was a dark hole that seemed to sit right between all the colorful plants. A hole with a pair of red eyes looking out of it. I didn't like that hole. It was right in the place my son usually dug, and it made me shudder. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the hole that he had colored with his black crayon. "All except the eyes." "Nothing," he said, too quickly. "No secrets, pal. Come on. I won't be mad. Does it have something to do with the dirt?" David looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he just shook his head. "No, it's just a hole." I didn't press it, but I probably should have. I reminded him that the dirt needed to stay in the yard, and he went back to coloring. That night, however, I lingered by his door after lights out to see if I could catch any more weird conversations. I wasn't disappointed. My wife looked at me strangely as she came out of the bathroom, but I shushed her and told her to move on. She shrugged, shaking her head as she went past, but I was sure that the whispering had something to do with it. I was crouched by the doorframe like some kind of stalker as he wallowed down underneath his covers. When David started whispering, I was ready. No, they said I couldn't anymore. No, they'll catch me and I'll get in trouble. Mom already said I couldn't play video games until the weekend, and it'll be longer if I get caught again." David paused for a long time then, like he was listening to something, and when he spoke again, I could hear the tears in his voice. "Don't talk like that. Of course I love you. I want you to get better. I know, but I can't keep bringing it inside. I know why you want me to do it, but I can't. If you loved me so much, then you wouldn't ask me to." And then I heard him flop over and go to sleep, and if whoever he was talking to was still talking, he wasn't listening. I kept watching him over the next few days, but he didn't even go near the garden until it was time to water or weed it. David stayed inside more, reading or coloring, but the dirt still appeared. It wasn't a lot, just a few handfuls beneath his pillow, but my wife was beside herself with anger. She grounded him for a month from playing video games, and wouldn't let him stay at his friend's house until further notice. He nodded, accepting it, but I'd begun to wonder where it was all coming from. I mentioned this to her, but she just pushed it off as him doing it when no one was looking. It's under his pillow. It has to be him. Who else could be bringing dirt into the house? Punished or not, David didn't seem to be bothered by it. In fact, I thought he might be getting sick. He was listless, dark circles forming under his eyes, and I took him to the doctor at the end of the first week to make sure that he didn't have a cold or something. She said he was healthy, but she wanted to put him on something to help him sleep. Poor kid looks like he's suffering from exhaustion. The source of his exhaustion became apparent a few nights later. I would have probably never caught him if I hadn't gotten up to pee at around 3 a.m. I stopped at his door to check on him, and something didn't seem right. His bed didn't look the way it usually did. His pillows were a little too poofy. And when I flipped back the covers, I found that David's bed was empty. I started tearing through the house, checking everywhere that he might be, and when I came to the kitchen, I found that someone had left the back porch light on. I couldn't see him, not at first, but then I saw something come flying up over the hole in the middle of the garden. "I don't know," I heard him half whisper from the hole. "I thought you said you were there." I crept up to the hole, not making a sound, but as I got closer, I heard David start to get frustrated. "I don't know. I'm trying, but the ground's too hard. I can't get to you, Grandpa. I want to help you, but the ground's too hard. My fingers are bleeding. Please, help me. I've dug so deep. I can't. David?" I asked, and he jumped and looked up guiltily. "It's a little late for digging, don't you think?" He looked down as he stood in that hole, and when I put a hand down and offered to get him some hot chocolate so we could talk about this, he shook his head. No, I need to get Grandpa out. He says he's trapped, and I need to get him out." He tried to keep digging, but there was no going any deeper. My wife came out when I called for help, but we couldn't manage to wrestle him out of the hole. We had to call for help from the people in the white vans who spoke in soft voices, and that was the end of David's digging. The men at the facility they took him to say he's doing much better. Being away from the garden seems to help him, but they want to keep him for a while so they can be sure. I hate it for him. I hate seeing David like this, and I hate even more that I can't tell them the truth. The truth is that I know why David keeps the dirt under his pillow. It's the same reason I try to avoid the backyard as much as possible. You see, I haven't been the best narrator, and for that I apologize. I had thought that only 2 people knew what really happened to my dad. To most of the world, they think he just wandered off and never came back. He'd been diagnosed with dementia after all, but he was such a stubborn old goat that he wouldn't go live with anyone. The only person he ever remembered was David, but after getting a call to come pick him up from the police, I'd tried to put my foot down. Dad didn't like that. He didn't like that one bit. This time, however, when he tried to put his hands on me, I pushed him away, and he smashed his head on one of those huge roots at the bottom of the tree. Dad had made my childhood a living nightmare, and I wasn't going to let him take my adulthood because I had finally decided to stand up for myself. So I buried him. I buried him in his garden. I planted some flowers on top of it. No one looked too hard. People moved on, and as his only living child, I took control of my childhood home and his accounts. Sitting here writing this, I can hear him whispering as I sit on the back patio and listen to the night birds. He wants out. He wants to be buried next to Mom, and he wants the police to know what I did, but he'll need something better than a 6-year-old to dig him up. The concrete I poured on top of him before I filled in the hole will keep most things from uncovering him. The more I think about it, the more I think this backyard could use a pool. Something below ground. Something with a diving board. I think those flowers have been here about long enough. Much like our own favorite grandpa, you just never know what you might find growing in the garden. Coming up next, we have a story about a strange tree that grows in the park, lovingly tended by someone, I'm sure. Let's hear a story about the man who lived in the hollow oak tree. None of us believed him. How could we? It was just so odd that it couldn't be true. I swear to you that it happened. I can't prove it, but I swear to you it happened. We all just kind of shook our heads, but the look on Roger's face should have been proof enough that he was serious. He just looked so haunted, like he'd seen something that would never leave him. Roger's a habitual drunk. He manages it well for work, but he's been a drunk since I met him in college. Not a social drinker, or a fun drunk either, but a hardcore alcoholic. Like I said, he keeps it under control so he can hold a job down, but from quitting time till he passes out, Roger is drunk and in his own world. The story he told us happened in the park last night, and the way he told it made me think that while he was telling it, he might be stone sober. Roger had been off that day, so, of course, he's headed straight down to McGrady's at 11, just as the other day drinkers were starting to sober up. He drank his lunch, met us for shots after Ryan and I got off work, and then left about 8 when the bartender told him to stop smacking the jukebox or get the hell out. Roger, very drunk at this point, had staggered out and gone to the park across the way. He intended to sit for a minute and wait for his head to stop spinning long enough to pick up a fresh bottle and start drinking at home. I was sitting on the bench near the little pond. You know, the one across from the hollow oak tree. I had nodded, knowing just what he was talking about. The hollow oak is kind of a landmark in the town. Guys from the agricultural college had tested it a few years ago and determined that it was 80% hollow on the inside. They were at a loss to say how it stayed in the ground, but it did, and people sometimes came to take pictures. The city had set up a little chain perimeter around it, and you weren't supposed to touch it or disturb it in any way. So I'm sitting there, watching the sun go down, and night begins to settle, when I see this guy come out of the tree. We had asked him if he meant someone had been, up in the tree or leaning against the base of the tree. But Roger just shook his head and repeated that the guy had been inside the tree. It's like he had floundered with his words for a minute before settling on, you remember when you were a kid and you played with Play-Doh? You had that thing that would squeeze the clay through a little hole and make, like, spaghetti or something? Well, it was kind of like that, except way, way worse. He said it had started with an arm. At first, Roger had just thought it might be a squirrel or a bird, but when the finger gripped the bark, he began to think he might be hallucinating. The arm pulled its way out of the knothole, and pretty soon, a pale shoulder was sticking out too. The shoulder stretched and turned, and when a head followed, Roger said he almost screamed. He was certain he was hallucinating then, sure that the sauce had finally cooked his brain, but he doubted even his mind could create something like this. The tree pushed the person out, head and shoulders, knees and toes, and the man had hit the ground on all fours like some kind of spider. He scuttled across the grass under the chain. When he got to the edge of the barrier, he started making gagging noises. As Roger watched, the man had thrown up a dozen small somethings and then scuttled to the other corner of the barricade to do it again. He had done this 3 more times, upchucking into each, and when he looked up from the 4th round, he had made eye contact with Roger. The man's face, he said, had been confused but not afraid. He was looking at something unfamiliar, and when he smiled, Roger felt his breath catching his throat. The man's teeth were pointed like a bunch of sewing needles, and the look had been far bigger than Roger's pickled brain could understand. The smile looked painful, too big, like like he could have swallowed me whole. Roger had run then, run all the way home. That's where we'd found him last night, passed out on the floor and mumbling in his sleep. I finished my coffee and told Roger that he better get ready if he wanted to ride to work. Roger said he wasn't going in today, though. He'd told the boss he didn't feel well, and I told him I'd meet him at McGrady's after work. He had shaken his head at me, mumbling about how he'd never go back in that bar again. I think I might be done with the sauce for a while, he said, his voice shaking like a leaf. I rolled my eyes and left for work, expecting I'd find him drunk when I got to the bar that night. When I got to the bar at 6 o'clock, though, he was nowhere to be seen. The bartender said he hadn't seen him all day, but asked me to remind him that his tab still needed settling. I asked a few of the regulars, and they said they hadn't seen him either, so I stepped out of McGrady's and found a familiar shape sitting in the park. I walked up to Roger and found him stone sober, sitting on the same park bench he had told me about in his story. "Have you been here all day?" I asked. Roger nodded as he stared at the tree. I had never seen Roger this way, and it kind of scared me. I'd seen him sober before, and I'd seen him drunk plenty of times. But this was different. He was like a different person, someone who's seen something he can't comprehend, and I felt sorry for whatever it was that was going on inside his head. "You were serious about that thing, weren't you?" I asked. Roger nodded, his eyes boring into the tree like he meant to melt it. I wanted to walk away, but I found myself sitting down beside him instead. My morbid curiosity had gotten the better of me, and if this creature was real, then I wanted to see it myself. So, we sat like watchers in a theater, waiting for the show to begin. It wasn't a short sit either. 6 became 7, 7 became 8, and 8 became 8:30 as we sat watching the sun sink lower and lower. It was high summer, and the days were long. Just before 8:30, the sun became a burning coal on the horizon, and the two of us tensed for what might or might not be about to happen. As the darkness settled over us, I sighed. "Good one, Roger. Got me to waste my whole afternoon on this nonsense. Come on, I'll buy you a drink, and you can have a good laugh at me about how you—" But he grabbed my arm then, pointing at the tree with a shaky hand. I looked back, and a long pink worm was beginning to make its way out of the knothole. "It's just a worm, Roger. You got drunk and hallucinated something that scared you. I'm glad you're using it as an excuse to get sober, but don't ask me to buy into your delusion." "Does that look like a worm to you?" he asked, his voice shaking. I glanced back and saw that it indeed no longer resembled a worm. The one worm had become 5, and they were attached to a pale pink hand. The hand had unfurled from the hole like an alien flower, and as the wrist made its way out, I realized that the show had begun. The wrist emerged, and behind it came an arm and an elbow. The shoulder was next, and as the tree sprouted a man, I found myself unable to look away. He came slithering from the knothole, this boneless creature in human flesh. It was like watching dough being pushed through a press, and I wondered how it could possibly do this. When his head came free, it looked like nothing so much as a helium balloon being inflated. "How?" I gibbered, my mind refusing to understand what it was seeing. "How can this be?" If Roger knew, he never answered. The two of us sat mesmerized as we watched this fully grown man come slithering from a gnarled hole too small for a squirrel to fit into. He hung from the opening when it was down to his legs, a caterpillar ready to slide from his cocoon, and he hit the ground on his back before flipping over gracefully and scuttling on all fours towards the chain-link fence. When he opened his mouth, a spray of small somethings came spilling out onto the ground. They were black, looking like the smooth river stones you sometimes buy at a hobby store. He threw up about 20 of them before scuttling to the other corner. He repeated this operation 4 times, and as he opened his mouth for the 4th time, I saw the double row of pointed teeth in his oddly large mouth. He looked up after seeing us, and just as Roger had said, he smiled before scuttling back into his tree and pressing himself back into the hole. It was like watching a blow-up doll deflate in slow motion. First his arms, then his shoulders, then his head, then his legs. Before long, his feet were disappearing grotesquely back into the cramped little opening. By the time he was done, it was almost 9, and I felt as though my brain had been awake for days. That probably sounds weird, but when you see something like that, something that just doesn't make sense, your brain tries its best to make it fit into the picture of the world you know. Birds fly, fish swim, and this man compresses himself in and out of a tree so he can throw up. I stood up then, and Roger grabbed my arm. "Don't do it. If you look, you won't be able to stop yourself." I pulled myself away from him, wanting to see what it was. I needed to know. Why did he come out to throw these things up? Were they bugs that were killing the tree? Were they some kind of sickness he had to keep purging? Why did this thing that defied logic come out of this tree just to throw up these whatever they were? I bent down, taking out my phone as I shone a light on the pile closest to us. I gasped. I couldn't help myself. They were acorns. Solid black acorns that were about 2 sizes too large to be a normal acorn. I reached down to pick one up, but my hand froze before I could touch it. I stood up, wiping my hand despite it having touched nothing, and offered to buy Roger a drink anyway. After what we had seen, I thought we both probably needed one. "No thanks. I think I'm done with drinking for a while. Maybe you ought to come home too," he offered. We ended up heading home and just watching TV for the rest of the night. Roger hasn't had a drop of alcohol in a month, and I still find myself dreaming about that strange creature once or twice a week. It'll fade in time, but I want to get it down here so other people know. Given what happened yesterday, it's information that people might need. You see, the news reported that the Hollow Oak had gone. No one had seen it go, but the patrons of McCrady's had speculated that it must have been between midnight and 5 a.m. when the bar closed. Many of them had seen the old tree when they came inside, but reported that it was gone when they left at 5 a.m. after last call. But never fear, local botanists have reported that a small sapling has already sprouted in the spot its predecessor occupied. There's no evidence to suggest it might also be a hollow oak, but this reporter certainly hopes so, the man on the TV had said. I'd like to say this is where it ends, but unfortunately, there's a little more. You see, I couldn't get those strange acorns out of my head. I kept thinking about them, wondering about them. So the night before the hollow oak left, I went and watched the man as he went about his strange and disgusting ritual. Once he had gone back inside his tree, I went to the pile and took one. I put it in my jacket pocket, and now it's sitting on my desk. It seems to draw my eye, the little acorn almost appearing to beat like an infected heart. And my mind tells me to plant it in the ground. Roger told me that if I touched it, I wouldn't be able to help myself. And I guess he was right. I don't know how much longer I can stop myself from planting this thing, but I fear what might come tumbling out one night if it grows. So if the hollow oak should happen to land in your town, don't touch its strange occupant's acorns if he should come out to deposit them. I wouldn't interrupt his strange ritual either, not if I were you. The occupant seems harmless, but those teeth must be for eating something. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, if you like tonight's story, you can thank a dream I had, because this is basically based on a dream that woke me up one night. I guess to me it was a nightmare, but everyone I've told it thinks it's a little bit funny. If you enjoyed tonight's story, maybe think about hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories coming up. Let's also go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Emily Coltsfoot and Xaronan for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can get all these great rewards that my patrons enjoy. So, come on down and have a look. If you'd like to pick up my new book as well, Sleepless Nights, there's a link in the description, so come on down to Amazon and get your own copy. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
You just never know sometimes what you might find growing wild. Coming up next, we have a story about a man growing a very strange garden in a very strange cemetery. So let's hear a story about Whispering Pines.
It is my pleasure to unveil an innovation in burial services. The investors looked uncomfortable as they sat in the hot sun on the edge of John's latest investment. When the tech mogul had bought 500 acres of swampland, people had speculated that he meant to build another factory for his microchips. Tech magazines had floated the idea of everything from warehouses to a new robotics division and everything in between, but none of them could have guessed his true intentions. His stock price had doubled since the announcement, and investors seemed to be holding their breath to see what would come out of Yomite Solutions this season. Only his accountant had known the real story, and he had been sworn to secrecy. Not a word to anyone, John said, winking as his usual smile spread across his face. Wayne had snorted. John, no one would believe me if I told them. Now here they were, their eyebrows raised as he talked about not some new piece of tech, but an innovation in the burial of all things. Behind me stands 500 acres of new growth, trees ready to provide mankind with oxygen, and many helpful species of insects and wildlife will find a place to live here. Beneath them, however, are the first in a long line of subjects in our land renewal innovation. The bodies are infused with seeds. The seeds take root and use them for nourishment, and as such, become a sort of casket for the dead. He saw some of the squirming looks held by those gathered and decided to squash them. Behind me stands what will one day be a new forest, a forest that will be untouchable thanks to the laws now in place. Think of it. Every cemetery a forest, every boneyard a park, every place of death a place of rebirth. This is the future, a future that bodes well for the earth and for the health of our planet. Welcome to Yomite Pines Memorial Forest, a place of eternal rest and peace. The investors clapped. It wasn't over-enthusiastic, but they clapped. They would see, in time, that it was a good middle ground. John had done a lot of harm to this planet with his factories, his smog, and his landfills full of obsolete electronics. If he could turn people's minds and grow a memorial forest in every state, it would go a long way towards making him feel better about the business and his soul. John Yomite, in fact, hoped to be buried in one of these forests himself one day. He had no way of knowing how soon that dream might become a reality. That was the first night that he had the dream. He was running through the rows of newly planted pines, the ground groaning as they grew towards the heavens. They towered over him, their branches grasping for the sky, and as they blotted out the moon, he heard their whispers. Join us, join us, join us in the soil. The ground sucked at his feet as he ran. The sand clung to him as if trying to hold him down, and as he jogged through the park that he had created, a cold wind blew amongst the trees. He woke up in his bed as the whispers grew, and breathed a sigh of relief when he realized it had all been a dream. Did the water in his morning shower look a little darker as it went down the drain? Were there leaves in the pocket of his sleeping shorts? Was there maybe even some mud he overlooked on his arms and legs? Maybe, but if there were, John didn't see them. He shook it off his nerves as he got ready for the day, but it wouldn't be the last time he ran through the trees by night. Wow, John, if you'd told me this thing would take off like this a year ago, I would have called you crazy. John looked down over the forest of pines and oaks, their tops coming in as they grew strong. The glass window over his tower made the perfect observation platform, and the glass was thick enough to block out the whispers he sometimes heard when he walked the grounds. Wayne was going over the numbers, but John was barely listening. You did call me crazy, John said, looking down over his forest of trees. He had built this tower so he could watch the forest grow,
and he found he was truly at peace when he stood up here. Watching them sway, watching them grow, it was all so different from anything he had done before. "Did I?" Wayne said. "I guess I was wrong. This has been a bigger windfall than any of your previous endeavors." John would have agreed if it hadn't been for the incidences that kept cropping up. Who would have thought that people would pay so much to save the planet and to be one with the burgeoning forest? John asked. "Now, if we could just figure out why people keep going missing, we'd be set," Wayne retorted. He said it with a laugh, but John really didn't find it funny. If it had been one or two, John could have understood, but what kind of memorial garden loses double-digit guests in their first year? The large forest had become a popular tourist spot, and people had come to camp and walk and take in the natural beauty of the new-growth forest. The trees were only about half the size that they would grow to be, but they were still an impressive stature. They were the living embodiment of those who had nourished them. At least that's what the papers and some of the journals were saying. There were plans to grow more of them if participation was good, and so far it had been. People were interested in helping the environment and having a quiet and beautiful place for their relatives to visit them. And the list of people who had bought places in Yomite Pines would facilitate the buying of another 20 or 30 acres at least. It had all been looking so promising before people started going missing. At first, it wasn't anything to get excited about. A couple of campers never arrived back home. An older couple that never returned to their car after a visit. A man who never walked back out the front gate after walking in. These things were odd, but not unexplainable. People did all kinds of silly things, and this was no more than someone who simply decided to leave by another way, or had forgotten to check out, or perhaps decided to lose themselves on purpose and find a quiet place to die. The kid, however, was something else. Marcus Lorraine was 6 and had accompanied his parents into the little forest so he could visit his grandmother. They had walked amongst the trees, taken in the paths and little bridges and the shallow river that ran through it, but when they had turned to go, Miss Lorraine had noticed that her son was nowhere to be found. She swore he had been with them when they crossed the little bridge over the river. She swore he had been with them when they stopped to dip their toes into the water. She swore he had been with them when they stopped at the bathrooms. She also swore that she couldn't be certain after they had passed the picnic area and started heading back to their car. "I don't remember much after the picnic area, if I'm being honest," she said, her dreamy voice at odds with her tearful demeanor of a moment before. "I'd been walking along, listening to something, and for a moment it was almost like I was hearing my mom talk to me. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you that I could almost hear her voice." Her husband had said something similar, though not quite the same. He could swear he heard people whispering just out of sight, like they were sitting in the woods and discussing important matters. He described it like the scene in The Hobbit, where the dwarves keep interrupting the elves' party. He could hear them, but he knew that if he went to investigate, they would all just melt away and reappear somewhere else. Regardless, neither of them could say when little Marcus had left their side, but he was gone now, and they wanted him found. John stayed with the parents while the forest was searched. He had set up a little command center near the visitor center and was directing volunteers from there. Mr. Lorraine had gone out to help them at the start, but by sunset, he was back at the tent and sitting with his wife. The two were holding each other, both praying quietly as they waited for their son to return. They were upset, but John had yet to see them cry. They were afraid, but they didn't look overly fearful. He would have thought they'd be in shock, except that they kept looking into the forest as if
Someone were calling to them before going back to their prayers. "This isn't good," John said under his breath. "You don't say," Wayne had said, looking at the parents as he pitched his voice low. "Be as glib as you want, but Marcus Lorraine's disappearance doesn't look good." Wayne pulled him aside out of earshot of the grieving parents so that they could talk. "Do you have any idea how many kids go missing in the national park every year? Do you know how many theme parks lose kids without the help of creeps? Kids wander off, John. Probably find him asleep under a tree somewhere." They did not find him asleep under a tree somewhere. They didn't find him at all, as it happened. Marcus was the 15th person to go missing in the park that year, but he wasn't the last. "We've had hundreds more pre-orders for the upcoming acreage. We'll sell the plots as quickly as they become available. It's almost like we're printing money." John was glad that Wayne had forgotten about the kid so easily, but John found it a little more difficult. He remembered each of the names, each a civil suit their families tried to file before his lawyers shut them down, and he supposed he probably always would. Wayne went on talking, but John couldn't take his eyes off the trees. Their sway was so hypnotic. Maybe this was why people kept going missing. That, or the whispering that he heard sometimes. He could even hear it a little up here, but it was always worse when he was on the grounds. It was like a slithering little voice that wormed its way into his ears, begging him to come and join the others who had already come to this place. And why not, he thought. They all seemed to have found peace here. Everyone seemed to find peace here. Maybe that was why so many of them came here too. "How's your mom?" Wayne asked suddenly, and the question jarred him back to reality. "Some days better, some days worse. She's fading, but she's going out slowly." "Will you plant her here too when the time comes?" Wayne asked, the question sounding uneasy. "I've saved her a spot from the very start," John said, looking at a place near the base of the tower. "I grew this forest for her, after all." Wayne excused himself after a little more small talk, but John stood there and watched the trees sway. Who wouldn't want to be laid to rest in such a peaceful place? It's an honor to stand here and ring in a year since the opening of Yomite Pines Memorial Forest. The crowd applauded excitedly, but as John stood looking out over them, all he could hear was the wind through the trees beyond them. They were all pines here at Yomite Pines, somehow or another. Mighty pines that grew lush and deep green in the hardy soil. In about a year, they had grown past the projections put forth at the start, and John now stood beneath towering trees that had been little more than half-grown saplings 2 years ago when he'd begun planting. He shuddered a little as something else rustled against his subconscious, but he put it aside, like he always did. It was just nerves, after all, just like the dreams. I'm proud to say we've incorporated another 100 acres, 50 of which has been donated by the North American Wildlife Foundation to help with the deforestation efforts. Of those new 100 acres, we have already filled 50 of them with fresh growth and new remains. The Yomite Pines Memorial Forest will soon be a forest stretching across the newly reclaimed land, and our world will be better for it. The applause from the crowd was much more enthusiastic than they had been last time. The thought of a forest of dead people had been a little sickening, a little spooky too, but now they were behind him. This reforestation project was a big hit, and people were signing up for plots in the hundreds. Though Yomite Pines might be a big hit with the people, John was beginning to have reservations about the project. It had been 6 months since Marcus had disappeared, and now his mother and father were also missing. John had once liked to stroll out here, just taking it all in and soaking in the peaceful landscape he had created. He had been on one such walk about 2 weeks after Marcus had gone missing, when he had seen Mrs. Lorraine walking down the path towards him. Walking might have been a stretch. Shelley Lorraine was wobbling like a drunk, and as she came towards him, she looked as if she were barely in the world. He called out to her, asking how she was doing and if there was any news on Marcus, but it took 3 such calls for her to look up and acknowledge him. "Huh?" she finally said, shaking her head as if she'd been sleepwalking. "Oh, Mr. Yomite, She seemed to mumble through what she was before answering. "As well as I can be, I suppose." "Did you come to look for Marcus?" he asked, wondering why she was here if she was still looking for her son. The whole park had been searched from border to border, but no sign of the kid had been found. It was as if the ground had simply swallowed him up and left nothing behind. They had moved on to the surrounding scrublands, but John was certain that he had seen the mother in the park more than once. The father had come in once as well, but that was the last time that John had seen him. He hadn't come back out again after that, and John supposed he was doing better than his wife. Here she was, high or drunk or both, and John would have to tell security to keep an eye on her. "Yes," she said, looking off into the trees as if someone had called her. "Yes, it's like I can hear him when I'm here. He keeps calling for me, and I keep hoping I'll find him. Excuse me," she said, and stepped into the tree line as she went off into the towering gravestones that surrounded them. That was the last time that John had seen her. The last time that anyone had seen her, actually. The whole family had disappeared, and Scott, the security guy over the park, actually showed him the security footage of Mr. Lorraine coming in but never leaving. He asked John what he wanted to do with it, and John had told him not to tell anybody about it. He must have left in a crowd, and we missed him. There's no reason to tell anyone about this. It was a tragedy, after all, but as guilty as John felt, he couldn't have something like this sabotaged by one family. This was his chance to make amends for some of the things he had done, to make amends to the one person whose opinion mattered to him. That was the last anyone spoke of the Lorraines, but it wasn't the last John thought of them. The new acreage will be open to the public next year, once the new growth has had time to get its roots. Until then, I invite all of you to enjoy Yomite Park in its fullest. They applauded again, disappearing as John waved his way off stage. Wayne was waiting for him off stage too, all smiles. Maybe it was because he was an accountant, but as long as the money flowed, Wayne was happy. "Great speech," he said, walking beside John as the two made their way towards the tower. John watched as many of the people seated there took up walking through the park, looking in awe at the trees that had been grown from human compost. "We shouldn't be letting people just walk around the park anymore," John said suddenly. "It's too dangerous." Wayne looked confused, but as John finished, he grinned like a shot fox. "How else do you intend to pay for park services and expansion?" he said, smiling woodenly. Maybe it shouldn't be expanded. It shouldn't be open to the public either. No one picnics in a graveyard. No one goes bird-watching at the cemetery. The longer we let them walk the paths of Yomite pines, the more of them will go missing. We're up to 20 this year, and it's probably more like twice that number. Something's happening here. You're too money-hungry to see it," John said, now real emotion in his voice. Wayne looked like he wanted to say something cutting, but he contented himself with a lame, says the billionaire tech mogul. John rounded on him. "This has nothing to do with money, nothing to do with fame or glory either. I've spent years killing this planet with my selfish ventures, and now it's time to give back. The planet deserves a chance to heal, and I intend to give it that. Yomite Pines will sweep as far as I can push it, an untouchable beauty that will heal the world. But there's no reason that people should be free to wander here." The door to his car was open, and he climbed in as he gave Wayne one final withering look. "I want to close the grounds by the start of next month. I don't care what it costs. Make it happen." Wayne watched him go, and he sighed as he watched him get smaller in the rearview mirror. John felt more at ease as he drove off. The incessant whispering was finally cut off, and that was good because it was getting to be more than he could take. Every time he came out to the pines, it got worse, but
John still found himself drawn to the place. John dreamed about it most every night, and sometimes he woke up with dirty feet or muddy shoes at the foot of his bed. John didn't live too far from the park, but it was still 5 miles or more. Was he walking there in the middle of the night? Surely he wasn't driving, but what other option could there be? In his dreams, he walked amongst the trees, hearing the voices on the wind. In his dreams, he saw people walking amongst those trees, people who were as thin as fruit skins. They wanted him to join them, to come and be a part of them, and John found it harder and harder to ignore their call the longer it went on. He knew that one day he'd have to go to them, but until then, he still had work to do. This was a gift to his mother, after all, the woman who had been so disappointed with his actions, but had never stopped loving him. This was a final gift to her before she left the world forever. This was the last thing that he could do to make amends. The valet parked his car as he pulled up to the hospital, and as he rode the elevator up to the 7th floor, he wondered what state he would find her in today. She'd been getting weaker as the cancer ate at her, and it seemed unfair that it should be something like that would take his mother from the world. She, who had marched against deforestation, who had gone to sit-ins for cleaner oceans and for endangered species, the woman who had loved the earth with all that she had, was going to be taken from it by something as mundane as cancer. His mother was going to be eaten alive by something that none of his money could do anything about, and John hated that more than anything. He came in to find her napping, but she opened her eyes as he took her hand and smiled at him. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" he asked, trying not to cry, but knowing that his eyes were leaking. "Like I'm dying," she said, smiling despite herself. "Just not fast enough for the cancer's liking. We added another 100 acres to the park today. The ceremony was great. I wish you could have been there." "Me too," she said, her eyes drooping. She was so tired these days, so easily tapped out. "Mom, am I doing the right thing here? I know this is helping the environment, helping the world, but is it the right thing?" His mother smiled, her face sad but content. "I can't tell you that, dear. We all have to decide what's right and wrong for ourselves. I only want to do what would make you proud of me, what would make you proud to have me as a son." John was crying, really having a good boo-hoo, but he didn't care who saw it as he pressed his face against her shoulder. "Well," she said, laughing hoarsely, "then I'm glad my pain could be useful for something." He just sat there with her, the two of them enjoying the other's company. John had saved her a place for after she was gone, a place where she could be at peace within the earth. Her final good deed for the planet she loved so much. She would grow within the heart of the park, likely the largest tree in the park when she was done. She would rise above all the others, dwarfing all the pines as she rose for the sky. Till then, however, he would mourn her, one day at a time. He was running, the soil mashing between his toes as he went. The trees rose up around him, their voices high and beautiful. They called to him as he ran, asking why he was fleeing from them. They could bring him peace, too. They could make him complete within the soil. The moon was a ghostly sickle over top of him, and as he ran over the muddy ground of the park, his park, he felt more and more lost. He had built this place, had designed the layout, and it was unthinkable that he should be unable to find his way. This was a dream anyway, he told himself. He was dreaming all this, no matter how much dirt he found on his sheets in the morning. These were all just nightmares, regardless of the filth he found at the bottom of his feet. Nothing here could hurt him, nothing could really get him, but that did little to hamper his fear as he ran. "Come to us, John. Come find peace in the soil." His spine prickled. Had that been Miss Lorraine? He took turns at random, his feet feeling heavy the further he went into the park as it sucked at him. The ground was hungry, and now it wanted him to go along with the others it had taken. He didn't understand how it could still be hungry, but it ate greedily as he sank more and more of them into the soil. Now it wanted him too, and as his feet came onto the sidewalk, he breathed a sigh of relief. The ground couldn't get him on the sidewalk. At least he didn't think so. He seemed to come back to himself as that thought came to him, and he realized this may not be a dream. Suddenly he was standing on the sidewalk, wearing his comfortable sleep pants and his sleeveless t-shirt, staring at the whispering sea of trees. He had found himself here before, wondering how he had gotten here, and as he reached for his phone, he realized it wasn't in his pocket. It wouldn't be, would it? It'd be on his nightstand, right where he'd left it. He looked at the tower and was thankful that he'd paid for night security. He started walking towards the edifice, preparing to answer some questions yet again. This is starting to become a problem, John. Wayne was pacing around his office in the tower as John sat drinking coffee in his night clothes. Scott had called Wayne for some reason, and John would have to have a word with him about that later. John signed the paychecks around here, not his accountant and VP of sales. Scott was likely worried that John was having a break from reality. John realized that didn't change matters, though. This was still John's project, and he was in charge. If the shareholders find out about this is going to be bad. John laughed. Shareholders? What shareholders? This project is being bankrolled by me and me alone. Wayne shook his head. I'm not talking about the park, John. I'm talking about the shareholders in your other companies. If they find out that you're wandering around your memorial garden every night, they might worry that you're losing it. John shrugged. Let them think what they want. This is more important than anything else. Wayne looked at him then like he might be crazy. Talk like that's going to bankrupt you. I know you're torn up about your mother, John, but this isn't the time to give up. John didn't say anything for a little while, staring at the coffee as it sloshed in his cup. I don't know if I want to add more acreage to this place. I don't know if I want people here or not. The only thing I do know is that this work is important to the planet, if not the people, and it needs to continue. Wayne left not long after that, and John was left to stare into his cup and wonder. Despite what he had told Wayne, he added another 100 acres to the park. Despite what he had told Wayne, the people still came to the park. They had a man-made lake now, 3 picnic areas, and enough parking for everyone buried here and then some. They also added nearly 30 missing patrons to the tally, putting them at around 60. There had been many searches of the grounds, but no one had ever been found. It had become quite a mystery, and as John drove into the park, he grimaced at the graffiti on the welcome sign. People kept spray painting "Whispering" over Yomite on the sign, and John had replaced it several times already. He'd have to get Scott to check the cameras again, though he found the name extremely appropriate. John's dreams had far from abated, and he rolled his window up as the whispering tried to find its way to him again. They beseeched him to come to them, to join them, and John didn't know how long he could resist them. The dreams were drawing him out here nightly, and he'd started waking up in the park more often than not. It was becoming more and more apparent that he was simply walking here at night, and there didn't seem to be any way to stop that from happening. Lately, however, the calls had been in a voice that he couldn't refuse. He walked into the park, sliding in his AirPods as he came through the gate, and the whispering intensified. It really was a beautiful place. The pines had come in nicely, and they were growing tall and healthy. They stretched out from the gate now, a mighty forest that had risen from nothing, and he was proud of his work. He was haunted by that work too, but it didn't stop him from being proud of it. He had accomplished much in the 2 years since starting, but there was still so much work left to do. He stopped by one of the trees, the one near the base of the tower, and looked down at the new growth already poking its way through the soil. "Hey, Mom. Looking good," he whispered. She had passed about 3 months ago, not long after his conversation in her hospital room. She had been laid to rest in the park, his last gift to her, and the placard he had put up in front of her tree was the only real allocation for grave markers. Everyone else had a small number so their loved ones could find them, but his mother would only be important to him, and he knew that. She had been his last family, the only surviving piece, and now it was down to him to mourn her. When she had joined his dreams, adding her voice to the chorus, he didn't know how much longer he'd be able to hold out. Wayne was waiting for him when he got to the top of the tower, holding up the plans for the latest expansion. "We just got approval for another 100 acres. We should have it filled before June, and then the next 100 before this time next year, I guess. How much would it take to get another 1,000 acres? Wayne's eyes went a little wild. I mean, some of it would be available through government grants, but the cost would be steep. Make it happen. I don't care what it costs." Wayne looked at him oddly. "You feeling okay? You're not planning on doing anything drastic, are you?" He seemed to have noticed how close John was standing to the window. John couldn't exactly blame him for his concern. John had been feeling a little hinky, as his mom had been wont to say, and he wasn't sure what to do about it, or what he might do about it. "I'll get the papers drawn up," Wayne said, rolling up the survey charts. I talked with Scott about the sign, too. As usual, they can't find anything on the cameras to blame it on. Just kids out for a little helling, I guess." John nodded, but it's pretty clear that Wayne couldn't hear the whispers. He didn't get it. Probably never would. He was the perfect one to run something like this, though he would never understand the importance of it, or the horror. The nights John had spent out here had shown him where the missing people were going, had shown him his own fate as well. The whispering would get him one of these nights. It was only a matter of time. John was tired, but the terror made his legs move as the mud sucked at his every step. Maybe tonight was the night. Maybe this would be the night they got him. Maybe this was the night he became a part of Whispering Pines. Even the name had slunk into his consciousness. It was fitting, too fitting, and he could no more outrun it than he could the ground that sucked at his feet. Suddenly the ground did a little more than pull, and John was up to his thighs in the hungry muck. Beneath the soil he could feel the strong grip of searching vines and realized that if he didn't start fighting now, the jig would be up. He yanked and tugged, his strong runner's legs feeling ineffective in the muck. He was losing ground, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and when the paved path came into view, he waited like a drowning man. The roots gripped at him, dragging him back, but John pulled onward, working for the shore. Suddenly, the dirt was up to his hips, and he was wading through the fresh mud. He wasn't going to make it, he thought. The roots would get him, the ground would take him, and he'd be with the dead. One of his nails tore up painfully as he grasped the sidewalk, but he pulled himself up nonetheless. He limped a little as he walked towards the tower, one of his ankles having twisted a little as the root grabbed at him. John's steps weren't just heavy because of the ankle, though. John hadn't gotten a good night's sleep since he opened this damn place. He was exhausted, living off cat naps in his office, or the 4 or 5 hours he snatched a night. John was used to weird sleep schedules, and he had kept strange hours throughout college, but as he got older, it became harder to maintain. He didn't know how much longer he could last like this, and as he came to a familiar placard, he stopped in front of it. His mother's tree was larger than it had any right to be. Seemed larger than it had been this morning, in fact, and the concrete bit at his knees as he dropped down before it. "Mom," he said, tears running down his face. Mom, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm so tired. I want to rest. I want to... When his mother's voice shuddered against him, like the caress of a bird's wing, he looked up and saw her. She was lovely, bedecked in leaves and green, the queen of summer in all her glory. When she reached down to touch his face, her hands felt like flowers against his skin. He closed his eyes as he leaned into her touch, her words like summer sun on his skin. You've done your best, John. Come, rest with us. John nodded, pitching forward as the earth swallowed him up. He should have been terrified, but the embrace felt almost womb-like. It felt so natural, like coming home, and John breathed in a lungful of soil as the darkness enveloped him. Welcome home, his mother said, and John felt at home. It's my tremendous pleasure to announce the expansion of Whispering Pines Memorial Forest. The park has become less of a memorial and more of a forest in its own right now, and I hope someday to see hundreds of forests like it, instead of useless granite slabs that do nothing but take up space. I know if my friend, John Yomite, or his mother, Tera Yomite, could see how this project had expanded, they would be very proud of the work we've achieved here. I've watched this garden grow into a mighty forest, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. John watched as Wayne spoke to the crowd, telling them about the new backer who was interested in what they were doing here. John understood the words he said, things like the woman's name, Titania Thurston, the Green Society, and Kashmir Botanical Gardens, but they didn't mean anything to him. If someone was interested in his idea, that was good. If they let the forest rot, he supposed that was okay too. John was part of the Whispering Pines woods now, and he supposed that others would be too, very soon. Being a tree was probably the best thing he'd ever experienced, and he was eager to share it with others. Wayne still couldn't hear him, but he would, someday. Some of those in the crowd could clearly hear him, and they'd likely join him too, someday. John had time, after all. He certainly wasn't going anywhere.
Makes you wonder just how peacefully the dead really rest. Coming up next, we have a story about, well, it's not really a garden, but it's something tended by the forest and by many little hands. Let's hear a story about the Spider Mother.
It was a hike that we would never forget, though we wished we could. My girlfriend and I were hiking in a familiar spot, just like we'd done 1,000 times before. This hike was going to be different, though. We would hike 3 miles in and camp for the night, wake up at 5 a.m., hike up to Helen's Overlook, about 10 minutes from our camping spot, where we would watch the sunrise. While she watched, I would take a knee, pull out a ring I had bought a couple of weeks ago, and ask her to marry me. It was all so meticulously planned that I hadn't taken something into account, something no one could have planned for. We parked in the lot at the base of the trail. I'd hiked this trail and camped in these woods for years, and it seemed like a great place to bring my girlfriend after we got together. We'd been together for about 3 years, but it had been 8 months since we'd last been up here. We had meant to go at the start of spring, the changing seasons being our favorite time to be outdoors, but life had made it difficult, and we were excited to get back up here after a long hiatus. We grabbed our packs and headed into the woods, following the trail that would take us to the spot where we meant to camp. Technically, the Park Service frowns on people camping near the state trails. That being said, the spot where we meant to camp was off the trail and into the woods a bit. A ranger could still wander up and tell us to leave, but I sort of doubted it. I had only been asked to leave once the whole time I'd been camping here, and that was on an occasion when my brother and I had built our fire a little too high. We were smarter now, and We hadn't been discovered since then. "Sure is pretty," my girlfriend said, adjusting the straps on her pack as we walked. "Yeah," I agreed, looking at her more than anything. I slid my fingers over the velvety top of the ring box as we walked. I couldn't wait to give it to her, to see her surprise as I hit one knee and see her tearful delight as she accepted. It never crossed my mind that she wouldn't. We would get married in the spring next year and come out here camping for our honeymoon as well, so we could visit the spot again. Sometimes, however, God loves to laugh at our plans. It started with spiders. More specifically, it started with me running face first into a spider web. It had been hung across the trail, and the little builders fled as I slapped at the remains that clung to my face. I checked myself to make sure it hadn't fallen onto me, and when I was certain it was gone, I shivered as we set off again. From there, my girlfriend and I found ourselves dodging webs pretty often. They were just little spiders for the most part, but as they clustered together, the webs became more annoying. My girlfriend shrieked as one clung to her hair, and as I helped her check for stowaways, I couldn't help but feel crawly. I'd seen spiders in the woods before. They lived here too, after all, but never like this. I had expected that some of the late-season snows would have gotten them, but they were here despite it all. We followed the trail, dodging spiders and looking for landmarks until my girlfriend finally said she had to pee. "I'm just going to walk over this way. Keep an eye out for other hikers?" I told her I would, and she stepped off into the woods to do her business. When she screamed a few minutes later, I ran into the woods expecting to find a bear or a coyote or something. Instead, I found my girlfriend leaning against a tree, shaking as she pointed to something strange hanging from the tree. It looked like a cocoon, but it was practically throbbing with spiders. I had once seen a wasp's nest hanging in the woods, the big papery-looking ones, and that was what it looked like more than anything. It was hanging from a nearby tree from the thick strands of silk, but I could see something rougher wrapped around the limb, too. The spiders were scuttling all over it, and watching it made me a little bit sick. Sorry, I'm incapable of doing it justice, but there were more spiders on this cocoon or egg sac or whatever it was than I'd ever seen. They had spun webs all over the trees and the canopy, and they just kept spinning as they attempted to encase the little clearing in silk. This was their sanctuary, and they meant to keep it safe from people like us. "What the hell is it?" my girlfriend whispered. "What the hell is that thing?" I didn't know. I told her as much. As little as I wanted to get closer to it, I couldn't help but slink in as my curiosity tried to get the better of me. The closer I got, the less it looked like a wasp nest, and the more it looked like cotton candy. I know what that sounds like, but it was almost translucent, and as I stared, I could see something inside. It was nondescript, like something seen through a dirty window, but there was definitely something inside that webby bundle. I had to stop myself from sticking my hand out to touch it, and that was when I saw something else that drew my attention. I would have completely missed it if I hadn't gotten so close, but now I could see the corner of something purple. It was underneath the spider cocoon, and a few more months would have seen the bundle get big enough to cover it, too, as it came to the ground. Something translucent covered it, and I looked at the bottom of the mass as I reached out a shaky hand to grab for the thing. "What are you doing?" my girlfriend asked breathlessly, but I ignored her. My hand came shakily into contact with the thing, and it was a plastic Ziploc bag. As I lifted it up, however, the back of my hand brushed something on the bottom of the cocoon. I grimaced as something wet slid down my hand, and as I saw something black and stiff fall to the leaves, I gasped and backpedaled towards my girlfriend. As the sun shone behind the thing, I finally got a good look at what lay inside, and my suspicions were confirmed. "We gotta go," I said, helping her up. "We have to call the ranger service right now." "What is it?" she asked, but I didn't want to tell her until I was sure. We went back to the car, and I called the rangers. In the meantime, I looked in the bag I'd been clutching the whole way down the trail. It was a purple notebook, the kind you could get at Dollar General for a couple of bucks, and inside was someone's journal. Her name must have been Lisa, because she signed all of her entries with it. The more I read, the more I came to understand that this was a journal she was keeping in a mental health facility after a suicide attempt. She talked about the medication they had her on, about the groups she had attended, about the phone calls with her parents she had, and how it had all helped her see that life had meaning and that she shouldn't squander it. She had left the group home with a new lease on life, but that lease had soon run out. The last entry was made about 4 months ago, about a week before one of the worst spring storms in a decade. I just can't take it. Charles is gone. He says he can't handle my roller coaster emotions, and he took Sophia to stay with his parents for a while. My parents are trying to be supportive, but I can see what a burden I've become to them, my husband, and my daughter. So I've decided to leave. I'm going to hike the trails that gave me joy, and when I find a spot that I'm not likely to be found, I'll end it. If anyone finds this, my name was Lisa Turner. I closed it as a Jeep rolled up into the parking lot and put it back in the bag. The Rangers were a couple of younger guys, college-aged, still very green. They told us to lead the way, and we took them up to see what we had found. They laughed as we tried to explain to them what we had found, joking that it was probably just a really big wasp nest. They shut up when we got to the spot, and they saw it for themselves. They called in a few other people, telling us to stay close just in case. They brought a fogger and some thick suits for dealing with pests. As the spiders either fell dead or fled their perch, one of the Rangers brought a ladder and started inspecting the web mass. He was an older guy and looked like he'd been doing this since pioneer times. He shook his head and asked for the limb cutters. One of the younger guys scoffed. "There's no way you can cut that limb with those, Hawk." "Don't need to," said the older Ranger, I supposed, who was Hawk. He told everyone to stand back and snip something at the top. The whole thing came down, and when it burst, I saw what I had feared inside. There was a woman in the cocoon, her body bloated and rotten looking. She was covered in moving tumors that had burst and began spilling little spiders out of her. She had a rope around her neck, the purple marks still visible on the bloated skin. Her face looked peaceful, despite the bulges and tumors where spiders had used her as an incubator. The police were called, and I handed them the journal, told them how we had found the body. They thanked us, the Rangers telling us they would put our names in for an accommodation, but it was the old guy I was waiting for. He looked like he wanted to talk to us since he'd cut that body down, and when he leaned in close so the others wouldn't hear, I knew he meant to impart some wisdom. "These boys haven't seen this kind of thing before, but it's not my first time. I found a hiker 2 years into my job that had been used as a nest for ground wasps. I've found corpses savaged by bears, bones built into beaver dams, hikers skewered on the new horns of sporting bucks. Nature is beautiful, but it's unforgiving. You'll eventually forget what you saw here, but never forget the lesson. Nature will take you, if it can. It will take you, reshape you, and use you for whatever it needs. Be careful when you're in the woods, and always be courteous of the natural order." My girlfriend and I hiked back to the car in somber silence, neither of us having much to say. We didn't camp that weekend, but I did propose about 3 weeks later. I did it at our favorite restaurant, an Italian place in town, where we'd had our first date. She agreed with the expected amount of tears and squeals. I guess that makes her my fiancée now, and I'm glad to have her by my side. I've tried to forget what I saw in the woods that day, but I'm always mindful of my place when I'm in nature. Who's to say who might find me if I forget?
One last story for you, and I think I've got a pretty good one to go out on. It's a story about a man who's growing his own garden, though in a rather unusual way. So let's hear a story about the blooming.
I work for a landscaping company as a landscaper's assistant. It sounds pretty good, but it's mostly a lot of grunt work. You go get people's lunch, you go get people's drinks, or you go carry things that they don't want to carry. It's mostly just a lot of gopher stuff. The company I work for is pretty big in the area. They do a lot of landscaping and yard renovation and stuff like that. I had really hoped for something better at this point in my life, but I gotta pay bills and there ain't a lot of work out there otherwise. It happened while I was coming back from getting lunch. We'd been working for this rich fella near the waterfront, and my boss had been pretty frustrated when he sent me to get Arby's for everybody. We've been back and forth on this display for a couple of weeks, and we just couldn't seem to get the seedlings deep enough for them to take root. Something about the ground on the hillside where he wanted these particular plants was odd. Soil seemed like a mixture of clay and gravel, but the gravel quality was a lot thicker than usual. We'd tried planting, we'd tried digging, and short of blowing up the hillside, I didn't see any chance of changing the consistency of the ground. The client and my boss were both getting grumpy about it, and I saw him putting his head together with his foreman when I left an hour ago to get sandwiches. Now, the area we were working on was empty, and it appeared that everyone had gone home for the day. Somebody had set up these weird little boxes every few feet facing the hillside, but I didn't really see anything odd about them. "Hello," I called as I walked up with a bag of sandwiches. "Hello, where's everybody?" I had about a split second before one of the boxes to my right exploded like a mortar round. If it hadn't been for my throwing a hand up and the placement of the Arby's bag, I would have probably been blinded. It actually did damage my right eye, but the doctors told me I'd probably have gained back about 30% of my vision in a couple of weeks. My chest, arms, and legs, however, were hit with something like gravel kicked up by a truck. It was a big truck, too, and I felt more than a few of them pass right through my shirt and pants as they penetrated my skin. I stumbled back and dropped the shredded sandwich bag, landing against the hillside as I covered my face with my shredded arms. Other explosions were going off in the work area, and I heard somebody screaming to stop. The boss came running up at that point, followed by the foreman and the client. My boss didn't look pissed anymore. He looked scared. Turned out that the client had told him that he had until this afternoon to get the seedlings on the hillside, or he was going to go with another company. In desperation, my boss had let the foreman talk him into something that might have been unadvisable. What they had done was essentially load seeds into a blunderbuss so they could fire them at a high rate into the soil. The foreman, an old guy who had been in the army during Desert Storm, said that the penetration rate should be enough to get them deep enough in the soil to take root. Can't pretend to know what they were thinking, but apparently they were eager enough to get started and forgot to tell their assistant, who was out getting food. They had set them on a timer and then hunkered behind cover, just in case something went wrong. They didn't actually use blunderbusses, of course. Where would they even get them? What they used was a tube similar to the ones that they fire those fireworks out of, the ones that are, I think they're called mortar shells. They pointed them at the hillside and set them up to fire about 60 seconds later. My dumbass just managed to stumble into them when they started going off. Lucky me, huh? I spent a couple of hours in the emergency room as they treated my wounds. The doctor said the wounds weren't too serious, saying that it was like getting shot with rock salt more than buckshot. There was definitely skin penetration, but he believed that my body would probably push the seeds out on its own. The eye was concerning, but he assured me that I'd probably get most of my vision back eventually. He gave me some drops and cream and told me to use them as directed if I didn't want to walk around with an eye patch for the rest of my life. My boss paid for all of it, of course. It was the only way he could avoid a lawsuit. He also told me to take a couple of weeks off with pay. The doctor had told me to keep my wounds clean and take it easy for the next few weeks, so I considered myself fortunate to have a nice little vacation while I convalesced. It didn't start right away. I actually didn't notice it till about 3 or 4 days after the accident. I was sitting on my couch with my shirt off, watching TV and taking painkillers anytime I felt a twinge, when I looked down and noticed something weird. Growing out of the area just below my left nipple was a little plant. It was just a sprout, the leaves barely formed, and I muted the TV and bent over so I could get a better look at it. They had cleaned the wounds, but they'd been very clear that my body would probably push the seeds out on their own. It appeared that my body had decided to keep the seeds and give them life. I looked around and saw that there was another one growing as well. I had 2 little blooms on my chest, and I wasn't as worried about it as I should have been at that point. It was kind of cool. I'd never seen anyone with plants growing out of them before. I was on enough painkillers that I decided to see where it would go before it finally stopped. I noticed them on day 4, and by day 6 I counted 6 little sprouts coming out of my chest. 2 of them were coming out of my stomach, 2 of them were coming out of my upper chest, 1 of them was coming out of the dead center of my chest, and 1 of them was pretty close to my heart. I remembered thinking that was pretty cool, looking at the plants as they grew leaves and started to gain definition. They didn't hurt, nothing really hurt, and I wondered what I should do about them. They didn't appear to be hurting anyone, so I figured I would just leave them alone and see how it all shook out. I had a doctor's appointment in a couple of weeks so that they could check on the wounds. I figured if it was a problem, they'd let me know. This was also when I started writing down my observations so I could look back on them later. Day 8. I'm starting to get worried about the speed at which the plants are growing. I don't know exactly what we'd been planting on that hilltop, but the plants are beginning to look less like seedlings and more like actual flowers. I say worried, but it didn't stop me from going out in the backyard and sunbathing a little. I think it's neat to have plants growing on me, and I thought that they might need a little sun too. I felt a little like I might need to protect them. They were just little plants after all. I don't want anybody to try to pull them out, and I figured if they got a little bigger, people might not try to. Day 9. Some of the guys from the lawn service stopped by to check on me. I told them to wait a minute so I could put on a bathrobe and meet them at the door. I don't want them to see the plants and ask questions. I'd gotten a little paranoid about what people would do when they saw them, and I'd started to feel something in my chest that I associated with love. These plants were becoming like my babies, and I didn't want anybody to hurt them. They asked how I was feeling, told me I looked good, and told them I'd been relaxing and trying not to reopen my wounds. They asked if I was coming back to work anytime soon, and told them I still had 2 weeks of leave before I had to come back to work. They said the boss had made us all take a safety briefing about checking your surroundings before coming back to a job site. I thought that was pretty funny, given that he was the one that had forgotten to inform me about what we were doing. They all said they hope I got to feeling better and that they hoped they'd see me soon. I threw the bathrobe off once they left and went out in the backyard again. I'd felt something while I had that bathrobe on. It felt like something was crying inside me, like it didn't want me to be in the dark, and it wanted to feel the warmth of the sun. I don't know, maybe it was just some weird side effect of the painkillers, but I lay out there until the sun set, and when I got back inside, I had a pretty nasty sunburn to show for it. Day 12. I'd already decided that I wasn't going back to the doctor. The plants were getting bigger, some of them were starting to show signs of flowering, and I'd begun to take cold showers so I could water them. It's strange to say, but sometimes I would lie awake at night and just look at them. I'd gone to the hardware store and got one of those lamps that you use for when you're growing indoors. Guy probably thought I was a pothead, but I set it up over the bed and I started sleeping on my back again for the first time in a decade. As the light looks down on them, I find myself watching them grow a little bigger each day. There's a weird tightness in my chest that I can only equate with love. This is the closest I'll probably ever get to being a mother. It's a funny thing, discovering that you love something so late in life. Who would have ever thought that I'd finally have kids of my own at 35? I didn't even need a wife or anything. Day 15. I'd seen other buds starting to come up as well. It's getting a little harder to breathe, but it's probably just the pride. I'm so proud of my little flowers and how big they've gotten. It's like I've got a garden on my chest now. The 6 originals are about ready to bud, and I can't wait to see what kind of flowers they make. Aside from them, there's only but another half a dozen that seem to have sprouted up out of nowhere. And they've become a little like chest hair. I should really ask my boss what kind of seeds these are, but maybe he will want them back if I ask too many questions. He might think these plants are company resources or something. I can't have that. I can't lose my babies. Day 18. The new buds had started to open, and there was a riot of color across my chest. Reds and golds and oranges and yellow, even a couple of blue flowers that popped up. The original 6 plants had made about 3 to 4 flowers each, and the new ones are starting to look like they might make flowers soon too. I seem like I should be more worried about this cough, but it just doesn't seem as important as it would have a couple of days ago. I'm not as hungry as I used to be either. I really only eat maybe 1 big meal a day, but what I really crave is water. I've been drinking at least 2 or 3 gallons a day, and I still feel thirsty most of the time. It's probably just the painkillers. Maybe I should cut back a little bit. God only knows what those Vicodins are doing for the plants. Day 20. I've seen more new buds now, but I'm beginning to get a little concerned about my breathing. I've been breathing in shallow gasps for the last 3 or 4 days. I can't seem to get off the couch either. I manage to get up a couple of times a day to get more water and maybe catch a bite. I've stopped getting up to go to the bathroom altogether. Somehow just going here on the couch seems to be helping the plants. I've seen grass beginning to grow amidst my thick chest hair. Pretty soon I guess I'll have a regular backyard here. I seem to be afraid to go to sleep these days. Not because I think I might not wake up, but because if I watch closely enough, I can see the plants growing right before my very eyes. I'm afraid that I'm gonna miss something, and then they'll know I wasn't watching. My poor little babies need attention, and Mama is here to give it to them. Day 23. I don't know if I'm going to be able to write this much more. My arms are getting really heavy, and it seems to be taking a lot of effort to breathe. My chest is really tight. I sometimes think I can feel things moving underneath it. I don't know what's going on, but the flowers are doing really well. They just keep growing and growing, and the colorful blossoms bring me joy as I lie here and try to make the water last as long as it can. The last time I got up, I went ahead and brought about 12 gallons from the living room where I'd been keeping it. The Amazon guy looked a little weird as he dropped off all that water on the front porch, and I had to rest a couple of times as I tried to bring it all in. I don't even drink it anymore. I just pour it right onto my skin. I don't eat either. Whatever these plants are, they seem to be keeping me alive, and I appreciate them for that. It's nice when your kids take care of you in your old age. Day 30. This is probably going to be the last one of these that I do. I'm so tired all the time. It takes everything I have to keep breathing. My babies, my babies are doing so well. They're growing out of me like a garden. can't say that I've ever been prouder of anything in my entire life. I think my heart's been stopping in my sleep, so I've just been staying up for as long as I can. I'm out of water, but it appears that my children have found something else to eat. To whoever finds this, don't hurt my plants, please. Just bury me somewhere nice so they can get bigger. I want my gravestone to be covered in flowers. I want them to keep growing up after I'm gone. Tell my boss I don't blame him for any of this. This is the single greatest moment of my life, and I owe him so much. I feel fulfilled for the first time ever, and it's all because of him.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.